Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we try to cut through the noise and get you truly informed. And today, we're diving headfirst into a policy shift so significant it's already shaking up global commerce. Really big stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, picture this. As of August 29, 2025, just days ago, a massive change in U.S. trade policy took effect. President Trump's Executive Order 14324 has globally eliminated the $800 de minimis exemption. Now, this was a rule that, for decades, allowed millions and millions of low-value imports to enter our country completely tariff-free.
That's right. And the impact, well, it's been immediate and pretty widespread.
Yeah, we're already seeing European and Asian postal services, think DHL, Royal Mail, Singapore Post, Thailand Post. They're actually halting shipments to the U.S.
They basically can't navigate these new customs rules, or at least not yet.
We saw a preview of this chaos back in May, didn't we? When the exemption for just China and Hong Kong was removed first.
We did. Over 1 million packages got backed up at JFK Airport alone, just within days.
So this isn't some minor tweak. It's the official closing of what many critics were calling a loophole.
Right. A loophole, they argued, disadvantaged American businesses and was heavily exploited by foreign adversaries.
And the scale here is just enormous. We're talking about a policy change affecting over 1 billion shipments annually.
1 billion, valued at something like $54 billion. It's huge.
So brace yourselves, because a historic shift in U.S. trade policy just happened. And it's really set to reshape everything from, your online shopping cart to America's manufacturing floor. Today, we're exploring the elimination of the de minimis exemption, what it was, why this major change occurred, and what it truly means for U.S. manufacturers, for U.S. consumers, and, well, for global trade.
It's definitely a monumental change, and I think to really grasp its full scope, we need to understand what de minimis actually was.
Absolutely. Let's start right there. For many people, de minimis might just be a term they've heard floating around, but its impact was huge. So what exactly was this rule? How did it become so central and now so controversial?
Okay, so at its core, the de minimis rule allowed imports valued under $800 to enter the U.S. free from tariffs and most fees. Simple as that on the surface. But its origins go way back to 1938, actually.
1938, wow.
Yeah, and back then it was first implemented with a tiny $1 threshold. $1.
$1.
Exactly. And the initial idea was purely administrative. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they just wanted to avoid spending disproportionate time and money processing duties on items of such low value.
Right. It wasn't worth the government's effort for just a dollar item.
Makes sense. It was a common sense efficiency measure. But it certainly didn't stay at $1.
Clearly not if it ended up at $800.
Right. That original threshold was in place for decades, surprisingly. But then in 2015, Congress acted, with broad bipartisan support, mind you.
Bipartisan? Interesting.
Yeah, they dramatically updated it to $800. And this wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It reflected the booming e-commerce world.
Okay. All the small packages coming direct to consumers.
Precisely. The increasing volume of small, direct-to-consumer shipments. The intent then, in 2015, was genuinely to streamline trade, allow faster movement of goods that were still seen as low value, keeping up with online shopping, basically.
So that $800 threshold, once seen as a modernizing update, eventually became this major flashpoint. Why? What changed?
It did, and largely because of the sheer volume, like we mentioned, and critically, the origin of these shipments. In 2023 alone, just last year, China was the primary source country. 3 out of every 5 de minimis shipments entering the U.S. came from China.
3 out of 5, that's a lot.
It's a huge proportion, and this explosion in volume, particularly from certain countries, it transformed what started as an administrative convenience into, well, a really significant economic and political issue.
So what began as a practical way to keep customs moving in 1938 kind of swells into this $54 billion loophole by 2023. That massive shift clearly signaled something was up. What truly tipped the scales? What prompted President Trump's administration to completely scrap a policy that had been around in some form for nearly a century? What were the core reasons behind closing this door?
Well, from the administration's perspective, the motivations were laid out pretty clearly. They centered on national interests, economic security, and fairness. That was the language used. One of the primary drivers cited was the need to level the playing field for U.S. manufacturers.
Okay, how so?
Our $800 threshold was just dramatically higher than most other countries. You mentioned some earlier. Canada's around $110. Mexico's about $50. China's is under $7.
Under $7. Big difference.
Huge difference. So the argument was this put U.S. exports at a clear disadvantage compared to imports coming into the U.S. duty-free. By eliminating this exemption, the goal is to make U.S.-made goods more competitive. The projection is an increase in import costs by roughly 12% to 22%.
So basically making imported goods more expensive, which hopefully helps U.S. producers compete.
That's the idea. And this policy shift is seen as particularly beneficial for complex or highly automated manufacturing sectors, things like semiconductors, aerospace, where labor costs are a smaller piece of the pie.
Got it. So it's partly about making it more attractive to buy American, or at least making foreign goods cost more. What else?
Another critical motivation mentioned was combating exploitation by foreign adversaries.
Okay.
The $800 exemption was widely framed as a loophole that was explicitly exploited by foreign companies, especially those Chinese fast fashion giants like Temu and Shein. You hear their names a lot in this context.
Right. They ship tons of small packages directly.
Exactly. Their business models were essentially built around structuring numerous small, low-value shipments specifically to bypass U.S. tariffs. President Trump had already suspended de minimis for China specifically back on February 1st, 2025. So this global move wasn't entirely out of the blue.
And I remember national security being a really big part of the discussion, too. What was the argument there?
Absolutely. National security and combating illicit goods, this was a primary political justification. Proponents argued that these de minimis shipments, because there were so many and they were low value, received less scrutiny. And therefore, they contributed significantly to the flow of illicit drugs like fentanyl and also counterfeit goods. Some sources even claim these shipments accounted for 90% of all illegal narcotics, agricultural goods, and counterfeit seizures.
90%. That's a staggering figure, if true.
It's a very powerful claim, and it was definitely used to build support for tightening controls on these shipments.
Okay, so leveling the playing field, stopping exploitation, national security. Any other economic or political levers mentioned?
Yes, a couple more key points. The administration also framed this as a way of reducing the trade deficit and generating revenue. The de minimis system was labeled a de facto trade concession that contributed to what they called an unsustainable trade deficit.
So collecting tariffs on these billion packages would bring in more money.
Exactly. Eliminating it is projected to significantly increase customs duties. Some legislative proposals, like the End China's De Minimis Abuse Act, estimated an increase of about $24 billion over 10 years just from closing the loophole for China.
Okay.
And then there's the push for promoting domestic production and reshoring. This ties back to helping U.S. manufacturers. Supporters basically acknowledge, look, this might mean higher prices for consumers in the short term.
Yeah, that seems unavoidable.
But they argued it's a necessary cost to incentivize manufacturers to build and produce more here in the United States, kind of a backdoor industrial policy. There was even legislation proposed that would use the new tariff revenue to help companies move their manufacturing out of China and back to the U.S. or allied countries.
Interesting. Using the tariffs to fund the reshoring itself.
Right. And finally, let's not forget, tariffs can also be used as a direct political tool.
How so in this case?
Well, for instance, the administration raised tariffs on Brazil to 50%. And the stated reason was due to the Brazilian government's alleged politically motivated persecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro and his supporters. They invoked emergency powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to do that. So it shows tariffs being used for explicit political goals, separate from just trade balance.
Okay, wow. Lots of different motivations woven together there. Economic, security, political. Let's try to unpack the impact. Such a big change, driven by all these factors. It's bound to have many ripple effects. What are the key arguments we've heard about the consequences? What does this really mean for our economy and, maybe most importantly for listeners, for our wallets?
You're right. The ripple effects are substantial. They touch almost every part of the economy. And yeah, they'll affect you directly as a consumer. On one hand, pretty much everyone expects increased costs for consumers. Studies by Oxford Economics and Nomura, for example, estimate that products previously sent under de minimis could see cost increases anywhere from 40% to 55% for the end user. That's you.
40 to 55%, that's a lot.
It is. This translates to maybe $8 billion to $30 billion in additional annual costs spread across consumers and taxpayers. So think about it like this. If you often buy, say, a $20 item from overseas, maybe some unique craft supplies, a gadget accessory, whatever, it's not just $20 anymore.
Right.
With a 40% increase, that's suddenly $28. A 55% increase makes it $31. And that's before any new fees. It fundamentally changes the calculation for a lot of everyday online purchases.
And I imagine this hits some people harder than others.
That's a critical point, yes. There's significant concern that lower-income households will be disproportionately affected. One analysis projected the average tariff impact on the poorest ZIP codes could jump from about 0.5% to 12%,
12%.
whereas richer ZIP codes might see an increase from maybe 1.5% to 7%, so a much bigger relative hit for lower-income areas. Which is ironic because, as some pointed out, the old policy was sometimes described as pro-poor precisely because it kept these low-value goods affordable.
And you mentioned fees, too.
Yes. On top of tariffs, we're looking at administrative fees per shipment potentially rising from basically $0 to over $23. When you factor in total per shipment costs, including potential broker fees and other regulatory burdens, estimates range from about $23 up to $47 per package.
Wow, per package. That could easily double the cost of a small item.
Or more. And you can bet those costs will almost certainly be passed on to you, the consumer.
So higher prices, disproportionate impact. Beyond just the price tag hitting us, this must be causing massive upheaval for how goods actually get here, right? Logistics must be a nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. That leads us straight into the disruption to international trade and logistics. We're already seeing it. Like we said at the top, many major European and Asian postal services, DHL, Royal Mail, Singapore Post, Thailand Post, they've already announced temporary halts or suspensions of shipments to the U.S.
Why? Just because it's too complicated now?
Pretty much. It's the suddenness of the new customs rules, the complexity, and likely still some unresolved questions about exactly how duties will be collected efficiently on millions of packages. It's thrown a huge wrench into the works. New duty collection methods are now required. For non-postal shipments, like maybe through FedEx or UPS, importers now have to file through the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE.
ACE. What's that?
It's basically CBP's centralized online system for processing and tracking imports. It's a much more formal process than the previous sort of hands-off approach for de minimis items.
Yeah.
It means more paperwork, more data entry.
Okay. And for regular mail, postal shipments.
For postal shipments, they're facing these new IEPA tariffs. That's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act again. And for a transitional 6-month period, these tariffs can be either ad valorem, which just means a percentage of the item's declared value,
Right.
or, interestingly, a specific flat duty, a fixed charge of somewhere between $80 and $200 per item.
$80 to $200 per item for 6 months.
For a transitional period, yes, that's the plan outlined.
Why the flat duty option initially? Why not just go straight to the percentage, the ad valorem?
That's a good question. The likely reason for this initial 6-month phase with potentially high flat duties is probably pragmatic. It gives customs, shippers, and businesses some breathing room. Implementing systems to accurately assess value and collect percentage-based tariffs, ad valorem, on millions and millions of individual mail packages is incredibly complex. The flat duty might be seen as a simpler, albeit blunt, way to start collecting revenue immediately while the more complex systems are fully implemented. It's like a temporary bridge.
A very expensive bridge for some items. This sounds like a monumental task, especially for CBP, our own customs agency. What kind of strain is this putting on them?
Oh, it's a huge strain, no question. Think about it. The elimination of de minimis means CBP suddenly needs to screen and process over 1 billion additional packages every year.
A billion more.
On top of everything else they do. This is landing on an agency that reports often say is already short-staffed. Estimates for how many additional staff CBP might need range wildly, from hundreds to potentially over 20,000 people. Plus, they'll need significant investment in new screening technology and facilities. It's a massive logistical and resource challenge.
But on the flip side, this disruption is supposed to create an opening, right, for American companies.
Exactly. While it causes pain points elsewhere, this disruption is also being framed as presenting significant opportunities for U.S. manufacturers. This policy change is being explicitly called a moment of opportunity, particularly for small and mid-sized American producers.
Because their competition just got more expensive.
Precisely. As imports become, say, 12% to 22% more expensive on average due to tariffs and fees, U.S.-made goods are expected to become much more competitive purely on price, let alone other factors.
So the thinking is, domestic production now has a more level playing field, or maybe even an advantage.
That's the argument. And again, it's seen as especially true for those complex or highly automated manufacturing sectors, semiconductors, aerospace, medical devices, where direct labor is a smaller part of the total cost, making them less sensitive to potentially higher U.S. labor costs. So the advice going out to U.S. producers now is Stabilize the factors you can control. Lock down your inventory management, streamline your processes, manage your margins, ensure quality.
Get your house in order.
Right. Invest in the right technology, like ERP or MRP systems if appropriate. Refine lean manufacturing practices. Rationalize your tech stack. Basically, deliberately prepare for growth. Because the expectation, or at least the hope from proponents of this policy, is that demand for domestically produced goods is going to increase.
It's easy to get swept up in some of the compelling arguments for this policy, especially the ones around national security and stopping illegal goods like fentanyl. Those are powerful arguments. But, when we strip away the rhetoric sometimes and look at the actual data available, a more, let's say, nuanced picture often emerges. What does the evidence really tell us about those claims concerning illicit goods? How does this policy really fit into the bigger picture of controlling things like drugs and counterfeits?
That's a really important question to ask. And you're right, the data offers some important nuance. While illicit drugs entering via mail were definitely cited as a concern, some analyses, including government reports, suggest that the overwhelming majority of illicit drugs, particularly fentanyl, like 99% of it, is actually seized at the southwest border, coming in through ports of entry, not primarily via small de minimis packages.
99% at the border. Okay, that's
Mhm.
different from the 90% claim for de minimis.
It is. And looking specifically at seizures within the de minimis stream, narcotic seizures reportedly represent only about 21% of all seizures made in that stream. Other things make up the bulk. So it suggests that while drugs do come through mail, focusing solely on de minimis might overstate its role in the overall fentanyl problem compared to other smuggling routes.
Okay, and what about counterfeit goods? That was the other big justification.
A similar nuance appears there too. While mail and express shipments, the main channels for de minimis, do account for a significant chunk, maybe around 40%, of the total value of counterfeit goods seized.
40% sounds like a lot.
It does, but here's the context. That 40% figure itself represents less than 3% of the total value of all legitimate de minimis shipments that were coming into the country.
Ah, okay. So less than 3% of the value is counterfeit, even if it's 40% of the seized value.
Exactly. So the key insight here, according to these analyses, is that while combating illicit goods was undeniably a major political driver for the policy change, the data suggests it might be a very blunt instrument. It ends up impacting vastly more legitimate trade, like 97% of legitimate shipments by value in this channel, than the illicit activity it's targeting within that specific channel.
Which raises questions about efficiency and, unintended consequences for regular trade.
Precisely. It forces a conversation about the policy's effectiveness versus its broad impact and its true cost-benefit ratio when applied so universally to these small shipments.
And it's also worth remembering, it wasn't like these shipments were completely unchecked before this big change, right? Were there existing rules?
Absolutely. That's crucial context. Even before this global elimination, de minimis shipments were still subject to screening by CBP. They weren't just waved through blindly. And attempts to deliberately circumvent rules, like undervaluing products to stay below the threshold, were already illegal and punishable. Plus, certain types of goods never qualified for de minimis treatment in the first place. Things subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties, or goods regulated by the FDA, for example, always required formal entry regardless of value. So the system wasn't entirely a free-for-all before.
Good point. And for consumers listening, wondering if everything they might receive from abroad is affected, not quite everything is changing, right? There's still some specific exemptions carved out.
Yes, that's correct. It's important to know that certain categories of goods remain exempt from these new tariff and entry requirements. These include things like legitimate donations and informational materials as defined by law. Also, bona fide gifts.
What makes a gift bona fide?
It generally means an item genuinely given by one individual to another without any payment or compensation involved. So it can't be part of a commercial transaction disguised as a gift. The limits are usually pretty strict. Also exempt is non-merchandise mail, like personal letters and documents, flats. And importantly, shipments going to U.S. military and diplomatic addresses abroad, your APO, FPO, DPO addresses, those remain exempt as well.
That's useful to know. And you mentioned earlier that this wasn't just an overnight decision via executive order. There was buildup.
Oh, definitely. It's really worth noting the extensive legislative context here. The elimination or reform of de minimis had become a hot topic in Congress for several years, with significant bipartisan interest. We saw several bills proposed, like the De Minimis Reciprocity Act of 2023, the Import Security and Fairness Act, and the End China's De Minimis Abuse Act. They came from different sponsors, different perspectives, but they all aimed at reforming the system.
So there was a broad political feeling across the spectrum, well before the executive order, that something needed to change with the minimis.
Absolutely. It reflected a widespread political desire for reform, driven by all those concerns we discussed: competition, security, fairness, even if the final mechanism ended up being an executive order.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it seems clear this is a really bold, decisive move by the administration. It's aimed squarely at protecting U.S. interests, trying to level that playing field for American industries, and, at least according to the justifications, bolster national security. But, as we've discussed, it comes with pretty undeniable costs, at least initially, for consumers. Huge disruption to global trade and logistics. And it presents this massive new challenge for our own customs agencies to manage. It's a policy with really two very distinct sides.
It really is. And I think this raises a crucial closing question for all of us watching this unfold. As America navigates this new, more protectionist trade landscape, what are the hidden costs we haven't foreseen yet? Or maybe what unexpected benefits might emerge from this massive shift? And perhaps most critically, how quickly can our domestic industries actually adapt? Can they truly seize this moment of opportunity, as it's being called, to bring manufacturing back home and ultimately make those potential long-term benefits outweigh the very real immediate consumer costs and global trade friction we're seeing right now? That, I think, is the multi-billion-dollar question going forward.